Richie?
Yeah, so I have the poll results. So you would have had, first supposed to correct, I said that the Minister of Finance said that it was the biggest budget ever that Tobago would get, but I was wrong. He said it was better than last year. I know he said something better than.
It was more than last year.
So he said it was more than last year. So are you satisfied that the 2022-2023 budget will move the country forward? We had 15 people voting on the poll this morning. 10 of you said no. It will not. 5 of you said yes. So, of course, you can continue to vote on this poll throughout the day, through our programming, and we'll give you the final results tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I'm just checking here to see if any more votes came in. No. I just got one Andre saying absolutely not. That's it. Yeah, okay. So that's it. More. Majority of no's. All right, as we wait for Mr. Mariano Browne to join us this morning. He's a bit late. He's never late. He's always on time. He's a punctual man.
We know there are a lot of demands and their times these days.
Yeah, just messaged me a little while ago.
So the 2023 allocation for the teacher represents an increase of $185 million. So over last year's allocation of $2.336 billion. So Tobago has gotten more. The allocation this time around is $2.521 billion. The THA can access another $135 million in loans financing for its development projects and $100 million TT in loan financing from CAF for coastal protection works in Tobago.
So they didn't get the $4 billion for the Roxborough project?
No, but I thought that was ambitious anyway. We see how it goes. A lot of emphasis had been placed on, of course, the issue of learning loss. And I wait with bated breath to hear the Education Ministry's contribution to the budget. Because education and training, as I fully agree with, has received the lion's share of the budget, the largest share of the budget. And a lot of emphasis has been placed on the underperformance at the SCA level. So they put aside $10 million to deal with the recent summer, July, August remediation. The trained teachers, also commendable, admirable, but only 2,700 of the 9,000 eligible students optioned that. So you have the others still to be remediated going to Form 1, or in Form 1 now, I should say, because the school term has started. But we've heard nothing about the Forms 2, 3, 4, and 5 that moved up. Form 5 now going to write SCA, SCAPE, sorry. And the standard 1, 2, 3, and 4, who also suffered learning loss. So I guess when the minister delivers her contribution, we will hear what the plans are to remediate them. And you know, something that I was not satisfied with, that the minister actually said, is that the $50 million, which has now been put aside for remedial intervention, is to take the school performance scores back to pre-pandemic level. And I would have thought that, you know what, this is an opportunity to move it past that. If you really want to be competitive, you're not looking at pre-pandemic level because they were okay, not fantastic kind of thing. So if you're going to remediate, let's jump ahead. You know, let's not just jump back to pre-pandemic levels, because those weren't fantastic anyway. There was about 40% or 35% of the school population that weren't doing great. Some were doing average and some were doing really badly. So is it that we do have the kind of vision to say, okay, this crisis is an opportunity? But again, let's wait and see what the education minister says
I
in her
suppose Dr.
contribution.
Nan Gadsby Dolly will address those concerns, Paul. We'll see.
I hope. What Steve can.
All right, Mariano is about to join us there.
Yeah, I waited bated breath.
Mm-hmm.
And to get data on the other cohorts' performance or underperformance, as the case may be. Good morning, Dr. Browne.
Good morning. Good morning, Professor.
How are you
Good
this
morning,
morning?
Doctor.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you? How are you? How are you calling me doctor this morning? What's going on?
Well, you are the doctor of finance.
Recording in progress.
Depending on for some insight. So,
Yep, absolutely.
I see all kind of people going honorary doctorate. So I gave you an honorary doctorate. Don't worry about it. You have the experience.
Show doctorate.
You have the experience and the training. More than
Right.
half of them would they given him a doctorate too. So whatever.
Mine is coming in due course.
Yeah.
Not the
I'm
honorary
not surprised. You see, I'm clairvoyant.
Not the honorary one. Not the honorary one.
Yes,
I
likewise.
saw you, Mariano Browne. I saw you on television last night agreeing wholeheartedly with the Minister of Trade and Industry.
About what? Sorry.
You all seem to be getting along.
I think that what you go like that. I don't say you sure you saw the same interview?
Must you see a little piece side where you told her good evening? He classified that as getting along.
I thought we had a major disagreement.
Okay, let's start with your overall impressions of fiscal 2022-2023 package.
Well, I mean, I'll go back to the several conversations we have had on this particular program where I've said to you that for change to come in Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, we were buying time and we were basically selling hope. And essentially, what we have seen is there's no turnaround in the economy. What has happened is that prices have increased. Right? Prices have increased at a time when production has declined. And as Kevin Ramnarayan was making the point, these are the two biggest assumed prices that we have ever had in any budget. Right? $6 for gas and $90-something for oil. We've never had those prices. Yet the revenue numbers are not the biggest. And they're not the biggest because in both instances our production has declined. The minister in talking about, if you listen to the minister, go back to 2018, 2018 he was very, very sharp, very positive with regard to the growth in the economy and the growth in the gas sector. And at that time, we were producing 3.6 billion cubic feet a day. We're now down to 2.5, 2.6, say 2.6. And his projection for growth in the energy sector is after enunciating about 10 different projects that have been going on and billions of dollars in US dollars in terms of investment. His outlook for natural gas production for next year is for just less than 3 billion cubic feet. In other words, we are producing at the same quantity we produced in probably about 2003. We are 37% off our largest production and we're 25% below where we were in 2018. The ammonia plants are operating below capacity. We have 2 or 3 methanol plants which are closed on one LNG train which is down. Now, those are the basics. Right, so the bottom line is that we've had no turnaround in the economy. What we've had increase in prices in the energy sector, which have been sufficient. And when I say increase in price in the energy sector, both in gas as well as in petrochemicals, much more in ammonia and urea than in methanol. The methanol prices have been much more moderate. And that's one of the reasons why. And we don't have enough gas for methanol plants. Some of the methanol plants remain closed. Right? There's not enough gas to go around. So you can't hang your hat on the energy sector indefinitely moving forward into the future. But the minister says in the course of the speech, we will continue to depend on the energy sector for a very long time in the future. And he then announces some changes in the SPT, which will give some relief to some of the onshore drilling companies. And he also talks about relief in the SPT in Never Never Land in terms of deep water, except that we haven't had any deep water fines and or in the bid rounds. Nobody really has bid for the deep waters. So, I mean, giving any sort of relief in that particular area is not a heck of a big thing moving forward. I mean, it's maybe if, when. All right. So that when we get down to brass tacks, what are the changes we are seeing overall? What are the changes that are going to move us forward? What are the structural changes that have taken place that have put the economy in a firmer footing, that we're going to move, that, you know, the economy is going to grow and other areas are going to basically start to demonstrate their capacity and so on? Well, the answer is that there are none. So what we're really depending on is a change at the state. We have had a positive change in the energy sector. And if you could take the numbers and you compare in terms of what he talks about the non-energy manufacturing sector, well, the non-energy manufacturing sector is largely petrochemicals. That has been reclassified. That is no longer part of our energy sector per se. It's part of manufacturing. I'll strip that out and then makes a comparison to say that the numbers are bigger in 2021 relative to 2020. Well, 2020 is a bad year. You can't compare 2021 with 2020. 2020 is when we had COVID.
That shouldn't be a benchmark.
That can be a benchmark. You have to compare it to 2019, right? On those numbers, any change is modest. So the reality is we have increased prices. That's it. Nothing else.
So
right?
what do you, so the projection of revenues of $56.175 billion, even with the oil price and the gas price projection, do you think that's reasonable in the context of the expenditure profile of 57.685? Because that means that they're closing the deficit. If we are to believe that 56.175 billion in expected revenue is reasonable and achievable.
I don't doubt it. I accept that it's 56. But you see, let's put it this way. The positive changes on the revenue side are largely due to circumstances outside our control entirely. All right. So let's just say that we expect that to continue for a year. Mr. Putin is going to be very, very good for the country. The war in Ukraine.
That's not going to end anytime soon, according to the experts' projections.
Well, all right. So on that basis, we could say that the energy price. There's been some moderation in the energy prices. The price of the price of oil has fallen within recent weeks. There's some changes which are taking place, and you will find those demand and supply changes, because more than likely Europe is going to go into recession. There may be a mild recession in the US, right? But if you listen to the head of the IMF over the weekend, the real issue that the major economies are bracing for is inflation. Inflation because of the huge energy price shock and the knock-on effect that is going to have in terms of households as well as the private sector and the availability of energy, particularly in Europe. That's going to be a major factor moving forward, and we're moving into winter. So a recession beckons. All right, we had the examples in the British economy. The British minister, if I take a huge bet, which is partly Keynesian, partly what you call it Thatcherite, in terms of their policies, and the market said, "Oh, really? We do expect it to work." All right, so we're going to see how that's going to work out. But the bottom line is that in a significant percentage of the world economy, you're going to see some depression. In China, China's growth rate has slowed substantially. It's come down from the big numbers that we had before, and we could say that China is now matured as a middle-income country, and its rate of growth going forward is not going to be as big. There clearly are issues, seems to be at a political level. We heard some stuff, rumors over the weekend. We've heard nothing else from China. We know that there have been the continuation of the lockdowns with respect to COVID. Hasn't worked well for them. Well, so that the rate of growth in the economy is going to be substantially less than the IMF initially predicted in the rebound in 2021. In fact, the IMF has literally been reducing its forecast every quarter. All right, so the outlook is about, we've gone back to a sort of moderate rate of growth of somewhere in the region of about 3% moving forward. All right, some countries are going to fall within that number. Many countries are going to be below that number. So we'll see how it works out. So I'm not going to fight with the minister over the revenue numbers. I don't think there's any value in that. The real issue goes back to the fundamental issues that we've been talking about, structural reforms. And I think the largest part of the budget for me was a signal to the unions that we cannot pay you more than what we have put on the table. Right? And I think the signal that came over the weekend is that we are serious. We're going to hold the line, and we're not going to accept walkouts and or strikes and or industrial action on a continuous basis moving forward. We are opting for industrial peace, and we're going to hold the line, and we're going to be hard about it. That's what I heard in the budget.
Looking at the situation with the non-energy sector but let me go to another question first. The issue of inflation is challenging economies around the world. While we are benefiting from the increased commodity prices, you see a slight shift downward in the subsidy regime, with the premium and super going up by $1, diesel 50 cents. Minister saying the impact of diesel obviously on the transportation grid and the knockoff effect on prices of goods and services in an already inflationary cycle had clearly been considered. What are your thoughts on how this budget will affect the man in the street who is already screaming bloody murder about the effects on inflation, particularly at the groceries?
Well, the bottom line is that we're not going to be able to do much about that. There's still going to be bloody murder in terms of prices. What the government has opted for, because the changes in the price of the fuel are not major. From that perspective, they will have an impact. It's going to factor in terms of the overall impact. We've already seen the rate of inflation has moved from a very moderate 1.5% to something in the region of 5%. Now, 5% sounds reasonable, but what you have to look at is the change, what we call the delta coefficient. All right, so the delta is to move from 1.5% to 5%, because that really says that the prices increased dramatically. Right? Or prices have started to increase and have started to reflect themselves in the index. And I think that's where you have to pay attention to. So the answer is that we are going to be having an inflationary situation. I mean, some simple things. I mean, you go to the market all day. I mean, we have some seasonal disruptions in terms of prices. So, for example, the price of tomatoes is probably about $20 a pound. They used to be 10. And somewhere about June, they were about $10 or $12. So you're talking about what? A 50% increase, 100% increase in price, right? You have to say that's seasonal. But if you look at another benchmark, say, for example, in the price of salted, not cod, pollock, 12-ounce packages of saltfish. 12-ounce packages, they move from $20 at Christmas time to $25, somewhere about in February. And then we move from $25 to $30, right? This weekend it was $30. Last weekend was $30. So you're talking about, that's a $10 increase between January and September. That's a 50% increase. So there are price rises, and the price rises have taken place in discrete increments that are affecting food. And food is one of the critical issues. So even if you were to adjust your taste patterns and use more local food, there are seasonalities in price.
But given our import levels in the country for food, just like the energy commodity prices that are benefiting us, we have no control over that inflationary prices that are projected to continue to rise.
No. And so the issue becomes, I mean, we had the conference 3 weekends ago about sustainable food production in the Caribbean. And we have to move from talk to action. It's not the first time we've been talking about it. It's not new. And the issues where that is concerned, from an agriculture point of view, there are 3 issues. It's not reflected in the budget. Agricultural access roads, and how we fix that. The other one is irrigation. And the third one is land tenure and access to land. You can't have and can't talk about sustainability in food crop production if you don't talk about those 3 issues. There's nothing reflected in the budget that dealt with that. Yes,
but does $1.33 billion really point that we are backing up the investment with the rhetoric?
You mean in agriculture?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean, but that's really a $400 million increase. So clearly there's some change, but we have to spell that out in terms of what are the areas in which have changed. The Ministry of Agriculture has fallen down substantially in the critical area in which we used to be strong, which was agricultural extension officers. Well, you're not going to get agricultural extension officers in the field in the case of 1 year. That's not going to happen. All right, it's impossible for it to take place. You can't just basically find the people and bring them out. So I don't know what those numbers mean, but the bottom line, I guess that the Minister of Agriculture will spell them out. There are structural issues which have to be addressed.
How much of that is, I mean, the conversation has been with the Minister of Trade and the philosophy about a free trade market, a capitalist system, where the issue of price control is almost an anathema now. So, and there are sectors they would
price control doesn't work. So
sorry,
forget the price control doesn't work. Let's forget about
but there are sectors that are benefiting tremendously from it at the expense of the general population.
You're talking about the free trade.
Yeah, the fact that we are spending forex to bring particular sections of retail items into the country.
Okay.
You know,
well, the biggest use of foreign exchange is not what is energy. You know, you import energy. You import fuel in the form of what you call it, diesel. All of it is refined. You import refined products. So that is the biggest use of foreign exchange. Food comes second, I think, second or third. All right, it's not the biggest use of foreign exchange. So that you have to. I mean, that's the reality. All right, we are now more like the other Caribbean countries in terms of importing our energy requirements. And that takes up a significant volume of our foreign exchange demand. So the issue, the minister is in a position and the country is in a position where it has to be cautionary moving forward. We have to be judicious in terms of the choices of projects that we use. That will put us solve some of our foreign exchange issues, alternatively reduce our demand for foreign exchange.
But I make the point in the context of when you look at it's a bad comparison to compare us to developed countries. But developed countries are countries that are looking 10, 15 years down the road because of their experiences of the past 2-3 decades, are looking at food security and energy security very, very carefully because they know that those are almost national security issues. In the wider context of it, there are existential issues in the wider context of any budget and projection for the country down the road. They're looking at those two in particular because of what they've experienced in the last, particularly 10 years.
Well, let's talk about it from a policy orientation. And I think that's the most important point. So let's just say, for example, that the prices of energy, we import energy. It's a significant component, significant use of our foreign exchange, and it's important because it drives the price of literally almost everything and that we've increased the prices. All right, let's accept that. Now let's just look in terms of do we have a national transportation policy which addresses that? If the complaint is that we have 1 million cars on the road, now let's just ask ourselves the question. We're in the middle of what technically the world is calling climate change and the need for reduction in terms of our carbon emissions, and the internal combustion engine literally is going to go the way of all flesh. We're going to change stuff. We need to move to electronic vehicles. Was there any sort of policy formulation that addressed that in the budget? Because you're really seeing in an island economy, you have 1 million cars. Well, when 1 million cars go bad, what are you going to do with them? Where are you going to put them? You can't dump them in the sea, because when you dump them in the sea, you're going to pollute the sea. And you're going to pollute, by definition, you pollute yourself, because we eat what is in the sea. So we have to talk about all of the changes that are likely to come with that. The structural changes that are going to change. I mean, for example, if you have an energy vehicle, we're talking about a range of what we'll talk about, engineering support solutions that over the course of the next 10 years will decline. So we're talking about people reconfiguring themselves in terms of what are they going to do. Right? We have a lot of mechanics and everything else that depend upon that built around the importation of cars, the repair of cars, and so on and so forth. Now that clearly is going to change over a 10-year horizon, right? So clearly we have to start anticipating that. If we are also saying that it is important from a transportation perspective, lots of man hours are lost in terms of traffic, then a national transportation policy becomes more important. It's not enough to say we're going to change the buses. We spend $400 million a year on PTSC. It transports 9% of the traveling public. It doesn't have the schedules. You can't swear by PTSC schedules by any stretch of imagination. People tell you to use the bus if it's available.
You're being very kind. The Minister of Transport told me 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, it was 4.5% or thereabouts.
Well, all right. So let's just say somewhere between 4.5% and 9%. The bottom line, it's small, right? So you're really saying that those other 1 million vehicles, all those PH taxis, the maxi taxis and everything else, What life do they have? What we have to talk about what we're doing in terms of a transportation policy to address those vehicles moving forward. Now that is tied up with our use of fossil fuel, right? All of that, those are important issues. Now, did we hear anything about that in the budget speech?
So you're basically talking about a transition plan to move vehicles that depend on fossil fuels out of the system.
Well, it is not only to move the vehicles. You have to talk about transportation policy from that perspective. We have gridlock on the roads now. Right? The price, presuming that the internal combustion engine goes out and we're going to tax it to that. When you look at the ministers, when the ministers benefit from cars, when you buy a $2-point-something million car, right, and you get all these duties waived and so on. Well, what was the real price of the car again? So we have to talk about what are we doing? How are we allocating the resources, right? Because in large measure.
But when you're talking about a transportation policy, you're right. It's not only about buses and or cars. It's about the philosophy of moving goods and services and people from point A to point B in a much more efficient way, saving fuel and increasing productivity because of the time issues involved.
Right, correct. And not only the time issues involved, the health issues involved. I mean, what it is to get children up. I mean, I spent the first 10 years on my marriage in Davide. I live virtually all of my life in Port of Spain. And I mean, getting up 5 o'clock in the morning to reach to work at 7 o'clock in the morning was a kind of norm. Whereas I grew up, you get up at 6:30 in the morning and you reach the school for 7:45. Right? You could walk. Right? That's not how we're operating now. So they have a whole series of contingent decisions that have to be made to support that. So I'm saying that I didn't see the articulation of policy. Remember, gentlemen, I have been making the point that we face a lot of structural issues, right? A change should change in the price of natural gas and natural gas export derivatives, right? Will improve our revenue. It is not necessarily going to improve our life. And that's the point I have to make, that we have other things to do. Now, the budget speech didn't address those other things.
What are some of the key other things that we have to do that you felt it didn't address?
Well, the issue of a transportation policy, the issue of the growth factors which are required from the point of view of, again, going back to energy. And we're saying that fossil fuels, we have to move away from fossil fuels. And if we use, if you want, renewable energy sources, then by definition, it's going to be important that we'll have more gas to export for the time being and therefore earn more revenue. Well, we didn't really have a holistic position in terms of where we are with renewables. We had a couple of things. Well, we give an incentive to the farmers for renewable energy, and we give something for renewable energy here if they, if the manufacturing sector will buy equipment that will run using A, B, and C, but you only give it for a year. Well, I didn't know if it's a transitional provision, is something you're going to be wedded to. If it's something, for example, I'm going to say, I'm going to look at it. No business, for example, that already has a plan for next year has factored in any of those tax incentives. You know, those tax incentives are only going to become important in terms of the next planning cycle, and the next planning cycle with regard to how am I going to adjust my production system. Right? Nobody's going to go out tomorrow because the prices drop by 10% to go and buy a whole set of equipment. Right? And by the way, the cost of a car is about $200 and something thousand. What do you think about a piece of equipment is in terms of the manufacturing sector? $220,000. So you get $50,000 off, which is about a quarter, 25% of it. Well, the kind of equipment we're talking about don't cost. It's not $200,000. We're talking about anywhere between $500,000 and $1 million. Right? Those are significant pieces of investment. I'm not going to go out and buy and do it on the basis of a $50,000 increase. I'm going to do it on the basis of what is my incremental production requirements and how does it fit in how I'm going to run my business. So I'm saying that some of those incentives sound good on paper, right? The reality in terms of factoring them out in terms of business decisions, right? I'm not going to do it, and you tell me I have a year to get it. A year? Well, my plans for next year are already set. Right, so that basically is going to be sometime during the course of next year, and by the time I apply for it, if I have decided to make the adjustments and changes, and if my business is going in a particular direction, then I'll look at it and factor it in. So the time window on some of those incentives is too short.
Well, that's infrastructure. What about the non-energy sector and the manufacturing sector in terms of the impact this inflationary cycle is having on them and their businesses? Because they import most of their elements of production or many of the elements of production and are facing the same costs increases with a dwindling market base to buy products and services locally.
Right. So the point I'm making, and maybe I'm expecting too much in terms of budget, but I'm seeing there are some policy issues were not articulated in any fashion that gives me hope for the long run. Right. What we have in the budget, as we've had in previous years, is that there are some short-term decisions which attempt to pacify, tell everybody, well, look, we're doing something, right? But the real deep considerations in terms of the changes which are required are not there. That's the point. The budget is a holding budget. It's a signal to the 40% of our labor force who made up of the public services. We can pay X amount. There are changes that are going to happen. This is as much as we could afford. We put aside X amount, $4 billion in terms of back pay. We'll find it. We pay the back pay quickly, but we can't afford very much else. We have to be conservative because we don't know how long this is going to last. So it was a holding budget. This is not a budget for the future. This is a holding position.
It's not transformative.
No.
He also talked about the issues of ease of doing business. At least he mentioned it.
Again? He mentioned it again?
He
pull out the record again? He pull out that song again, right?
And that there was the setting up of a new company called the Trade Promotion. I can't remember the exact name, but there was Trade and Industry and Promotion or something like that.
This is TIDCO 2.
And it seems as if it's going to be a merger of several companies under this one company.
It is a merger.
Including Creative TT and some other company, Expert TT.
Yes.
Several companies under it. And I didn't understand what the intention of that was.
Well, because the whole idea is that, well, when one merges and consolidates, one strips out expenses in order to focus on one particular objective. So it's a reorganization of companies which had been broken up and broken away from what one would have called TIDCO. Right. Now, this is a reconsolidation. So this is TIDCO 2. We're bringing back, we put in the services industry, the export promotion agency, did this one, we put it under one particular heading. And if you go back to, I guess, early independence, we would have called that the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation. So we've gone back to the Industrial Development Corporation because we are saying that all those small entities weren't working well or holistically together, and we're going to create, this would probably be a line taken from the 1985 budget, we're going to create a one-stop shop. This is going to be the new entity. So
I must admit, I'm not a big fan of it, especially for the Creative TT side, because anytime, historically, the creative sector has generally been neglected, and subsuming it into a larger organization just means that the loud voices are going to be the usual players, and the creative sector is going to suffer as a result of it.
But the moment it was separate, you all suffered, so.
I know, but at least there is still stuff happening in Creative TT, whether from the fashion side, the music side, etc. And at least there is it's a definite identity that you can go to in terms of if you're a creative person. But when it gets subsumed under one organization, to me, it starts to get lost. Well, and the value of the creative sector, I think, is minimized.
And those are valid comments. Now, I'll just point out to you, whilst we are consolidating, if you want, the promotional arm of Trinidad and Tobago, and if we just move right across now to tourism development, and what did we do there? Well, we actually broke up the company and created 2 or 3, if I remember correctly. So we are moving towards consolidation on one hand, on the other side, we're breaking it up. In the HDC, we're breaking them up. We're breaking up HDC. Have we changed the how HDC operates? No, but we're breaking it up. Supposedly it will make it a little easier to manage. So we have some competing alternatives, right? We are restructuring and reorganizing and centralizing in one hand. And on the other side, we are decentralizing and breaking up the tourism development company, housing development company. We now have a secondary roads company, which will have a capitalization of $100 million. And let's just take that as issue of policy. Let's just talk about our roads, which is a good point. Let's just think about our roads, which is important from a point of view of policy formulation as well. Now, we close the refinery. Now, resurfacing the roads requires bitumen. Bitumen comes from the refinery. Bitumen is the oil sludge which we mix with sand and so on and so forth. What is important in terms of building roads is the subsurface of the road, how we impact what we put at the bottom and so on. And then we talk about surfacing. Surfacing is the last layer to go on top. Trinidad asphalt is the last layer, it goes on top. There are specifications from the ministry with regard to the use of asphalt in terms of the mix of bitumen. Now, right now, everybody's importing, all the contractors are importing bitumen. Not all the contractors have the knowledge, the equipment, or anything else to use asphalt. That's the first point. So we have that as a question of retraining. Is there a move to retrain to make certain that Trinidad and the asphalt, the pitch which is produced by Trinidad and Tobago, which will help reduce our import demand for any other sort of material, right, is used with our bitumen, which we are now importing 100%? The answer to that is no.
Again, you're talking about overriding policy for
correct, right? Are the specifications enforced? So the ministry is repaving the highways. The specifications are allowed, have been put into position for use on highways. Those specifications do not apply to the repair of the secondary roads and primary roads. Where is the deterioration taking place most? Secondary roads and primary roads. Why is deterioration taking place? Well, because there's leaking infrastructure. The leaking infrastructure is about WASA. That's what's causing the problem in the roads, right? But at the same token, in terms of resurface and everything else, our policy and our specification don't extend to using Trinidad Lake asphalt, but instead we give Lake asphalt a subsidy to keep it going, right? Those are the kinds of things that you have to talk about, that you have to talk about holistically.
Which is unheard of, because if any other company had the assets or the raw material that Lake Asphalt had, country, wouldn't it be $1 billion revenue generator?
And if it won't be $1 million revenue generator, you would find a way to use it within your construction sector in a way that would reduce your import demand and therefore your use of foreign exchange. Those are the kinds of things that we have to speak to. Those are the kinds of things that you have to arrange. You have to match demand and supply. Right? Those are critical issues, right? So that's the point. Those are the kinds of issues that I'm talking about from a policy, where the policy, for example, doesn't work.
Well, speaking of policy, the education sector has received the largest allocation, which I have no problem with. However,
all that's going to do is we're going to pay teachers.
Right, and when I'm talking about from a more holistic, looking at it from a more holistic, so you get the largest share, but we have significant learning loss at the lower levels, which will impact our competitiveness down the road. Because you can't ignore what happened in 2 years, and it wasn't great before that, quite frankly, if anybody's to be honest with ourselves, at the primary and secondary levels, and it was exacerbated by COVID. Mm-hmm. When we have that kind of investment in education, you are the principal director at a tertiary level institution, right? And we're training, they've done they've announced some initiatives in GATE in vocational areas to start to deal with the tech work issues a bit more. Do you get a sense that the education, the investment is in alignment with a particular education and training policy that's aligned that's aligned to development? Because we're training people who are living here in droves.
Yes, and that has been the issue for a long time in terms of the realignment. But and that's the point. If you don't have structured policies to support, for example, certain individual sectors, then by definition, there's always going to be a mismatch. There's a mismatch in terms of what you're training for. And the emphasis on England has it, basically we copy the English education system, right? And England is in serious trouble with regard to its vocational training. The countries, for example, that don't have that problem and are best Germany and Japan, right? And we haven't learned the lessons that need to be learned. We haven't learned from Singapore in that regard, right? So you have to, the training and the point that you make in terms of paying attention, it's a conveyor belt. If you don't pay attention to the schools and spend enough money at the primary level, then you're going to have a problem in terms of your secondary school system.
And crime.
And crime, all right? And that's the relationship at the moment that nobody's spelling out, all right? That we have a generation of people who have come out of the system, or a particular percentage of that generation, the dropouts, if you want to call them, that have moved into other areas and not vocational, all right? We had the example recently in the Laramie robbery. I mean, 30 seconds. The intention was not to just simply to rob. The intention was to basically kill anything that was in the way. And they were young. These are young fellas. These are not hardened criminals. These are young boys.
Well, I would prefer a different argument. When you come with an AK-115 and you come out of a light your vehicle and you open fire, and your intention is to kill and then pick up whatever left and walk away with it, that is a hardened criminal.
All right, and I accept that. It means that he's gotten to that stage at a much younger age.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is not a soft criminal. If you could call a criminal soft. Well, that mindset had to be developed sometime before he got to 21.
So, but the parents didn't understand that. Parents certainly don't seem to know that. That's not the child that they raised, right? So that's
the child they want to see.
All right. Well, that's possible too. The point I'm making is, and the point that you have made, is that the training program, the part of the civics and everything else have to be reinforced at the other levels to move forward. And we've really had no change for a significant period of time in terms of the education plan, right? In terms of what we're going forward. What is the person or the child that we're going to be making?
You are training postgraduate business students in your institution.
Right.
Are there jobs awaiting them? Does the environment facilitate them opening a business? You're training them to run a business, to understand business. Do you get a sense that the investment in training them is redounding to more medium, small, micro businesses opening and being sustained successfully with the investment in training them? Well,
the answer to that is yes and no. From our perspective, we take the position that we have to help our graduates to move forward. And we spent more time than I think in terms of teaching than we probably have spent time in terms of positioning. I mean, two things are not the same. And a smaller percentage of our graduates are going to go into what we would call startup businesses and do the businesses on their own. In fact, that's probably the smallest segment. Most of the people are going to go into what we call established businesses. Now, the interesting thing about that is the majority of people who come to us are coming from a job. So they're not coming unemployed. They are reskilling. So we are a reskilling institution, and we have a very particular focus in terms of business. So you would find that amongst our national awardees, for example, about 3 or 4% of our national awardees are graduates from our school. All right. So in terms of positioning, you have to say that given where we are, we're not doing that badly where that is concerned, but there's more that can be done. And in fact, that's one of my key issues in terms of addressing the training that we move forward. And we are reconfiguring the institution to bring a one segment, open it up. We have three areas of emphasis, and we have to reopen or open a space now, which is going to be geared to do some of the things that you are talking about.
In terms of the Minister of Finance also talked about the digital economy, and he talked about a developers hub that is going to promote developers in terms of software, etc., etc. And he also talked about the e-identification and the cost of doing business,
again,
government business, etc.
Again.
Were you impressed with that section?
No. One of the key changes, one of the key things that made a difference in North America, and the government of North America in particular, made a decision with regard to the provision of certain services which are going to be electronic. And they literally did a thorough assessment and made a changeover to fill in that void, to be able to do it in that way. And partly because the business sector was operating along those lines as well. So it wasn't just simply that they were leading, right? But they, in a sense, changed the pace of development. Right? Now, that's not where we are with government. Unfortunately, government's intentions are good. Its practice and its outcomes are not as obvious. We have some patchy areas. The payment of taxes, a particular one. And I mean, for example, the minister in the course of his speech, for example, talk about paying everybody by transfers direct to the bank account. Well, I mean, that's not new. That's about 30 or 40 years old, right? You know, that's normative, one would figure. But there are specific areas, say, for example, in payment mechanism. If you were to set up a business today in Trinidad, and for example, you were purely internet-based, what you would depend upon is the broadband. The broadband would have to be reliable, it would have to be strong, it would have to be robust. Where are you going to be hosted? Which cloud are you going to be hosted in? Well, you will find that there aren't enough services done domestically that will facilitate you in that. And thirdly, if, for example, all of your payments are going to be made to you electronically, you would find that the banking sector is woefully behind in that regard. Woefully behind in terms of if you went to the bank and you say you want to set up an electronic account to collect revenue, and not just simply for you to access your account. The banks are helping you to access your account electronically. No, I don't want that. I want to facilitate payments into my account internationally. Well, you'll find that all the banks are using the same platform or using the same platform that VP will use or this one will use, using the same thing. It's an organization which is based in Bermuda, First Atlantic Banking Corporation, and you will find that many international organizations, for example, will not treat with it or don't treat with it properly. So your ability to collect your revenue online is going to be seriously affected. All right, so that there are institutional arrangements that have to be made good. Right, the governing law also has to change to be able to facilitate it and allow it, and there are huge drawbacks where that is concerned as well. And there's no real overwhelming demand. That's one of the reasons why it's so patchy. And the services have been so poorly done by the banking sector. The banking sector deserves a lot of stick in this regard. And I speak as a former banker.
But you talked also about e-payment providers, and you talked about Paywise being one that was recently accredited by the central bank.
It's important that you do so, right? And it's important if the banks are not going to be able, if the banks are not following in that regard, that they have to have some institutional capacity basically to develop therein, right? But I'm also making the point that government as leader in this regard, government as standard setter, government as what you are influencing the development of those standards. And I have to say to you that we've created huge problems with this anti-money laundering legislation, right? Which does not work, which doesn't capture anybody. But you go and open a bank account or try to open a bank account, and it becomes a veritable minefield. I mean, we've messed it up. So we're talking about all of these electronic things, but on the other side, we've created the whole issue of identification about who you are, what you are, and how it's going to take place. That doesn't work properly. And again, that's an institutional format. You're going to ask it, if you want to, for example, I run an institution, I have to basically renew my insurance policy. I have to send all the details of all my directors, who were there, X, Y, and Z, how long they were there on the board, and so on. Get copies of their what you call it, their bills, right? The electricity bills. Well, all the what you call facilities at the moment are giving bills on an e-platform. Right, so that creates another set of issues in terms of how do I download bills, what bills are authentic, and so on, and I'm sending that as verification. Right, so that we're putting in institutional requirements, detailed formulation requirements, right, that in a sense are being outmoded by the developments on another front. Right, so we are complicating the issues of doing business and transacting business. And the two things are, so it's one thing to announce all of these developments, but the policies have to be holistic. That's why I'm saying they have to be matched. The standards have to be put in position, right? All the payment systems have to operate properly, right? And those are critical, serious issues. You can stand up and say what you want in the budget speech. If on the other hand, between your central bank and your what you call it, anti-money laundering issues and so on, those haven't been calibrated. You can't do that on a paper-based system anymore. It's impossible, right? So you have to have some sort of electronic delivery capacity and some of electronic tracing capacity, That's where the development is. If I had to go and open a bank account in the US and open a bank account in London, I wouldn't get this kind of hassle. I speak from experience. I'm not basically saying that because if I've done it, you don't get that kind of difficulty in forming in opening a bank account or in transacting business along those lines. Those are the kinds of changes I have to talk about. So paying lip service to an e-payment function without talking about the underlying business systems. That's when we talk about, again, you said it nicely about ease of doing business. Well, ease of doing business is something you could talk about from but if you don't, ease of doing business is about how the processes fit together, the kind of documentation you ask for. How does that fit in with all the documentation currently being provided by the way the system operates? If that's not the way it's working, then you have to put something else in position. Right?
But if it is, I mean, Trinidad and Tobago has no shortage of bright people in terms of coming up with the kind of systems that will move us forward. Why is it so difficult to get us to that point?
Well, because in large measure, government is about a paper-based format. Government thinks in a paper-based format, and it also thinks in a very narrow terms. So in a sense, if government has to take the lead on this, then it has to change. Right? I mean, consider, for example, in terms of government filing system, it's still paper-based files. Right? The one area in which, for example, I know that they were forced to make a change were in the files, for example, in the Ministry of Trade when we were going to the single electronic window. The Minister of Finance used to have to come every year under the ETA Pioneer Act to industry and talk about all the licenses we were given. But I remember when I had to do that, I had to ask the question, so how many licenses we have? Well, they didn't know. Okay, all right, so how many are active? Right? How many did we initially grant? How many are currently in position? How many are dormant, etc. But they know now, because when they put in the single electronic window, they have to digitize all of that. Now, that is not only for one ministry. That's what has to be done across entire government set of arrangements. That's part of our problem. If you were to go and ask, for example, in terms of the Ministry of Energy, for example, and talk about the health and safety aspects, and ask what's the policy for that, and then ask a question, well, who has followed up with this and who has checked all of this? You'll find that that's not in position either, right? With for example, the gas stations, when last was their licenses renewed, etc., and everything else that went with that. And that's not only one department, that's across all of government.
So the licenses haven't been renewed in a while because not a while, but they have not been renewed in a little while. According to speaking to Robin.
Well, right, so there you go. So here we're talking about E this and E that. Hang on, but arrange fix your business then. So you start by fixing your
business. Some of it is going on in the state. I think there is a transition to that.
Okay, good, right. Okay, there is. You think some of it is going on, and you think that there's a transition to that, but you don't know it, sure. And it's not affecting you every day, right?
But I know in the institution that I am in, we have transitioned to digital files.
Oh, okay.
Completely. So a lot of our workflow is digital.
All right.
And we are connected to the state. So.
And you're that's positive, but that's only one.
But you're not run by the state.
Yeah. We are connected.
But that's one area, and I'm saying that is those are the kinds of things that have to be done across the system. Right? Now, I picked up one issue with regard to the gas stations. I mean, that should be reasonably simple. How many gas stations they have? 1,500? Is that hard?
Yeah.
Right? You understand the point I'm making? Right? So it ought not to be difficult. So the bottom line is that is where the improvement has to come from. It's not about talk. Right? This is about action. Right? This is about outcomes. Right? And that's one of the reasons why you started off, not me. You started off by saying or Paul. We're paying lip service to it in the budget speech. Well, the answer is we have to do these things on the basis of what are we going to achieve and the outcomes that we're going to achieve it and when we're going to achieve it by. Not some vague line in a budget speech.
Well, again, he may say there are other ministers who will come and speak thereafter in the continuation of the presentation who may go into more detail about that, to be fair.
Right. Well, all right.
But you're right. But the minister should have given a policy overriding and an accounting of progress so far and a checklist of what needs to be done.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Now, the minister spoke for 4 hours yesterday. Right? In a sense, he dulled us into what you. So by the time we were happy to hear any kind of what are the fiscal measures at the end, right? Right. What were the fiscal measures?
I like that analogy. He dulled us into submission. I don't know why budget presentation on it before, but I never understand it. But it's partly a political statement. So
it is a political statement, and even then, the political statement could be shortened. Right?
Yeah.
The fact that it is so long tells us something else too. What are the priorities?
Yeah. All right, Mariano, thank you so much as per usual.
You're welcome.
I know the demands on your time in the next week or two are going to be hectic. So we did you vitamins and zinc?
Not too hectic. I'll get back.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Mariano. All right. Taking a news brief, and then we have another guest online.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital.
Questions are being raised around the numbers around which the government has based its budget. Finance Minister Colm Imbert based the budget figures on an oil price assumption of US $92.50 per barrel. Natural gas price assumption will be US $6 per MMBTU. Former Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mariano, Browne, noted that these are the two biggest assumed prices in the budget in recent history, despite a decline in production. He suggested that, contrary to the comments by Minister Imbert, there is no turnaround in the economy. Mr. Browne also noted that one of his biggest takeaways from the budget is the government's firm stance on salary increases. He said the government has seemingly set a marker and has indicated that it will not offer more than it has to trade unions, which was emphasized by the stance taken at the weekend regarding tutor. Opposition leader Kamla Prasad Basasa is asking the government to provide information on the current balance of the nation's savings. This is after Finance Minister Colm Imbert told the country over $1 billion had been deposited into the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. During her response to the near $58 billion budget, Prasad Basasa, in a media conference at her Charles Street, Port of Spain office, said her team had been consistently asking for information on the HSF and had not been given answers by the government. She said they were only told how much was in the HSF and that $2.5 billion was withdrawn in 7 years. However, she said that apart from the withdrawals, the investments made internationally would have been negatively affected by the pandemic. Tobago House of Assembly Chief Secretary Farley Augustine expressed disappointment with Tobago's 4.3% budget allocation for the fiscal year 2023. Tobago's total assigned $2.521 billion, which is an increase from the $185 million received last year, is still 38.4% short of what the THA had initially requested. Augustine was clear on his feelings moments after Finance Minister Imbert delivered the budget yesterday. He noted that their request was significantly smaller compared to other financial periods. The Energy Chamber says it welcomes measures put in place by the Ministry of Finance to improve the fiscal environment under which the upstream energy sector companies operate in Trinidad and Tobago. It said the reductions in the supplemental petroleum tax rates for new wells in marine fields and the extension and expansion of the changes introduced in 2020 for small offshore producers are welcomed and will help the economics of new investments in oil projects. Meanwhile, AmCham TNT says, in their opinion, the budget gas price is reasonable in the current climate. They say they welcome reductions in the tax rates designed to stimulate upstream oil and gas production. And Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley is urging the public to rethink how it consumes fuel. His appeal came during a post-budget media conference at the Red House, Port of Spain, moments after Finance Minister Colm Imbert announced a hike in fuel prices. Imbert announced an increase in the price of super and premium gasoline by $1 and diesel by 50 cents a litre. The adjusted prices are now $7.75 per litre for premium, $6.97 a litre for super, and $4.41 a litre for diesel. These changes went into effect immediately yesterday. Dr. Rowley said adjustments had to be made to the subsidy and government made a conscious decision to cap it at $1 billion in order to allocate funds wisely to all other sectors. Well, that was your 8 o'clock news update. Keep it logged for news in full coming up at 12 noon.
Do you need to get work done on your vehicle? Look no further than the Auto Champions. Champlain Auto Services. From vehicle inspection to shutdown service, they do it all. Champlain Auto Services. Great mechanics and technicians. Exceptional customer service with accessories galore. Champlain Auto Services is your one-stop shop. They are your auto champions. You name it, they can fix it. Champlain Auto Services, Eastern Main Road, opposite Carib. Call 662-6545 and like us on Facebook. Champlain Auto Services. We do it all.
Up to date and credible. Power 102 Digital.
All right, thank you so much, Champlain Auto Services, for powering our 8 o'clock news brief. Check them out. They're on the Eastern Main Road opposite Caribbery. Can't miss them whatsoever. Anything to do with your vehicle, fleet management as well. They're coming across from Tobago. You got some time, you drop your car off and get service. You might even get a wash. All right, so check out Champlain Auto. Give them a call, 662-6545, or like them on social as well. All right, as our next guest is online already, Mr. Martin joining me to tell you quickly what's happening traffic-wise from Grandi. General Valento stretch is heavy again. Shoguanas to Churchill Roosevelt Highway. Highway is not bad at all. If you're heading from the east, you're going to pick up some traffic from Curep. Well, from Piarco to UV and then step on the gas and Curep in the Port of Spain, you got it. Usual spot, a little lighter, but still heavy, if that makes any sense. All right? 16 minutes after the hour of 8 o'clock. I'm going to take my quick break, a very fast break. When we come back, we'll have Mr. Martin George online.
Every Sunday, enjoy brunch at the Cascadia Hotel for an introductory price of only $99. Brunch time runs from 10:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. Kids 5 and under, accompanied by an adult, eat for free. So bring the entire family and enjoy in this delicious feast every Sunday at the Cascadia Hotel. Don't miss out. Call 235-4554 and make your reservation now. Brunch at the Cascadia Hotel for an introductory price of only $99. Special conditions apply.
It's hot, hot, hot. Furniture Plus September mattress sale is sizzling. Get therapeutic mattresses starting from just $999. Plus free gifts when you buy select Serta and Sealy mattresses. Available with cash and hire purchase plans. Check press and social media for details.
All right, thank you so much, Evil Twin. All right, let's welcome Mr. Martin George to the show. Good morning to you, Martin. How are you doing?
Recording in progress.
Good morning to you and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us on the Power Breakfast Show as we have our post-budget discussion.
Yeah.
Morning, Martin George.
Hey, sorry, Paul. Good morning. And Richard, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Martin.
Yes.
How's Tobago's weather this morning?
I don't know. I'll have to call somebody in Tobago.
Good answer. So, overall impressions of the budget initially before we jump in specifically to Tobago?
Well, the thing is, Paul, as I have said last night and this morning elsewhere, it seems to me that what it lacks is a clear roadmap showing where Trinidad and Tobago is going in terms of its economic recovery. That's my concern. In other words, it appears to be a holding position budget. So in other words, the Minister of Finance, he touted the fact that, okay, we have not gone to the IMF. He basically, made remarks about other Caribbean countries having to go to the IMF, which is a fact. And we are glad that, yes, we have not had to resort to that. However, beyond us holding our position, the question is, where are we really headed economically? And that's what I have not yet gotten from the budget. Maybe I need to delve down into the details some more, but that is something that actually should be, front and center. In other words, you are supposed to be able to lay out your plan lucidly, to be able to get the nation on board behind you and say, hey, listen, okay, we have to make some sacrifices, we have to make some cuts, we have to make some adjustments, but this is where we are headed. This is step one. And when we do that, then, okay, we build on that. This is step two. Then, listen, you do that and people will get on board. Trinidad and Tobago does not comprise of unreasonable people who are, unwilling to listen to logic and common sense and, take guidance if it is that you show a clear plan like that. So that's my main takeaway, Paul, in that I am not seeing that in terms of me being able to say, well, as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, I understand from the budget where the government plans to take us in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, or whatever.
Use the same term Mariano Browne used a short while ago, holding pattern budget. That's interesting.
Yes. Well, that's quite a coincidence because I didn't realize he was on the program. Yeah.
The issue of that sort of, I guess the word is vision or direction. Is it that they know something we don't know? They're being very cautious about the recovery / transformation, or is it that the government feels philosophically we're still in the recovery stage, and to move to changing direction now may be too risky?
It could be that, at this stage, they're just finding their way out of the pandemic. So maybe it's a sense of caution, maybe it's a sense of uncertainty. But remember, for financial instability, uncertainty is always your greatest risk, because look at what happened with the British pound yesterday. It plunged, just over the uncertainty that shook their financial sector. So, regardless of the challenges, you see, and that's why, and Paul and Richard, and Steve, I just hope that people in Trinidad and Tobago are able to one day put aside their political lenses and understand that when we have programs like this and we are discussing issues and ideas and practices, principles and procedures, and we are saying that, look, we are calling the government to account to a higher standard. It's not personal, it's not political. This is for all of Trinidad and Tobago. So in other words, when we put in government, you are put there to lead. So regardless of the challenges, you are still supposed to be able to say, hey, people, okay, all right, yes, we're in a crisis, yes, we're in a challenge, but hey, this is what we're doing to hold our position, and these are the steps we're going to be taking to move forward in this direction. And that's what you are there for. That's what governance is about. It's not just to say, well, okay, throw your hands up in the air and say, well, it is a bad situation, or like how they have done sometimes with crime and say, well, we are a violent country. I reject that notion. I reject that suggestion, So let's understand that we have to keep doing what we're doing, particularly on programs such as this, which is to try to get the population to understand that when we call upon the government to do their job, it is not political, it's not personal, it's for the good of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah. Now, I hear you in terms of the framework, the economic framework that guides us as to what is the economic plan, rather than being a holding budget, as you're referencing it, and which Mariano referenced it as. And I'm wondering if it is that they gave hints of it. For example, and I don't know if it is the government is, I don't know, tepid in terms of how it approaches certain things. So it mentions it as a line item in the discussion or in the long 4-hour speech. So, for example, the digital economy, he talked about the developers hub, he talked about software development in terms of innovators, etc., and which is an important part of the digital economy, and which is an important part of the world economy now in terms of software development, etc., and app development, etc. And so he mentions it as a platform, but it wasn't an intense focus on it that this is one of our platforms moving forward in terms of our economic recovery.
Exactly, and that's the point I'm making. So, in other words, it's the clarification and that level of communication, and then now you must relate it to the individual man in the street. So, in other words, people must be able to buy into it. So, in other words, okay, if you say, well, all right, okay, as part of our initial plan, we are going to make Wi-Fi accessible to every corner of Trinidad and Tobago for free.
But Martin George and Richard Ragoobarsingh, to come and say that again after you said it in the last two budgets might be counterproductive to people ascribing your credibility, because that has been said. Wi-Fi for rural areas, Wi-Fi for this, all those things, digitization as a pillar of our thing. We have a Ministry of Digitization that has been said in past budgets and has not materially come to life.
Right, that's the point. Yes, agreed.
So you go say that a third or fourth time and it can happen again?
Well, the thing is, that's what I'm saying. If it is that they could delve down into some details and show, well, this time we actually have a plan to, actualize this.
And we should believe you why.
Sorry?
And we should believe you why.
Well, true, they may not, the public may not believe, because the point is, if it is that there have been failed promises before, but this is what I'm saying. That credibility gap, Paul, is what the government needs to close. That credibility gap. So that's why I'm saying that, it appears that the budget is distanced and divorced from the general population, in that you are not relating it to the man in the street. And people are not feeling that sense, well, hey, yes, this is a plan for me. I am on board with this.
Well, I think the credibility gap is more than that, because in the past couple of weeks, when people have raised questions to the Minister of Finance about what he's projected and what has materialized, he got a little tepid, and gets a little defensive. But really and truly, part of what to me a budget presentation should be is accountability.
Yeah.
Because you've delivered 6 budgets before.
Yes. Yeah.
And what did you project? Tonight budget is projection, yes, in the last budget that materialized substantially. And what did materialize and why? I'm sure you have stuff that you could talk about that you have materialized, that you accomplished. But then there's a lot of stuff that I go through it because I have to. The presentation year by year, and I'm seeing these recurring decimals, but this come up again. So we hear this time the Toco port is at the environmental assessment stage, and that's all you hear.
Yes.
And it's like you hear about fishing pond, and then you hear about e-identity and digitization, and you don't hear. I guess the other ministers who will come after will have to give an account, hopefully, of where their projects are and why, and if they've materialized and what stage they're at. But you're right. The population ain't watching them. The population is watching come.
That's right. And you see, and that's where I think that the humanization of the budget presentation needs to be improved. I think really and truly we need to understand. So because look, even the gas prices, I think people can be made to understand that if it is that you get to their level and you are able to show them, how this is going to benefit the country in the long term, how it's going to benefit them in the long term. Just reading off statistics and figures and making comparators with gas prices in the US and in Barbados and other places, it doesn't help the ordinary man. If he's never been to Barbados, he's never lived in the US, what does that matter to him what their prices are? He knows he has to deal with his bread and butter issues on the table, how he's feeding his children, how he's taking them to school. And, here's the next thing, Paul. If you had, married that with a plan to show that, hey, we are going to be providing an efficient, effective, reasonable mass transit system. So therefore, the monies we save here are going towards that. So therefore, the general population will get at ease. Paul, think of how many millions of man hours are lost.
But you can't say that. But you cannot say that if you're not going to do that, and you're not going to do that because that's part of your plan. So you're going to say what you're going to do.
Well, this is the point I'm saying, so therefore, these are the things that I found were missing in the budget, because, this is how you make development happen in your country. You say, well, okay, look, we're cutting here, but it is because we are using that money to develop here. And that's what you're not hearing. All we are hearing is the increases, the more taxes, so the effect of it on the small man, the individual in the street is like, oh gosh, it's just more pressure, more pressure, more pressure, more pressure. That's what people are saying.
Yeah. But let's move to Tobago, because the Minister of Finance, of course, said that Tobago has gotten more than it got last year. And it's about 2.5 billion roughly. I think somewhere in that vicinity.
2.521.
Yeah, 2.521. Is it a holding budget for Tobago too?
Well, even more so, because if you look at the allocations, 87% of the budgetary allocation, because I worked out the figures, 87% is geared towards recurrent expenditure. So in other words, that is just to pay your existing bills, salaries, wages, rental, for goods, services, etc. So in other words, that is just for you to stay afloat. So that is even more of a holding budget where you have 87% of it allocated to recurrent expenditure. Now, this is something I have chastised the THA for in the past, and I will continue to do so, because no business model is sustainable at all if 87% of your projected budget is going to go towards expenses. It cannot be sustainable. So therefore, in other words, Tobago has to look at what it's doing with its budgetary allocation. It has to look at these recurrent expenditures and maybe make some adjustments there, because what you need to have more of is more capital intensive funding, more capital intensive development, infrastructural projects, which you can now have a lasting effect that, okay, when people drive around in Tobago, they could say, oh, yes, right. So I could see where the money from last budget went, because they built this, they provided this. That's what you need. You don't need to just be spending it on wages and salaries and rentals of buildings. Sometimes when you rent, you pay for some of these buildings, you could buy 3, 4, 5 buildings with the rent you're paying for the building. So, we really need to take a fresh look at how the budgetary allocation is spent in Tobago before we even begin clamoring to say, well, we didn't get enough money. Because, in other words, if you're not showing me any major project or investment in that sense that you want the additional monies for, one could very well understand the finance minister's viewpoint that, well, okay, what I've given you is enough. I made sure I covered your expenses, because that's what you need first and foremost. And you've not shown me any capital intensive projects that you need money for. So therefore, I'm not giving you any more.
Agreed. And the way it's going, I don't know who will be in charge anyway.
Capital projects and mega projects in Tobago. Maybe you can answer this for me, Martin. Mega projects in Tobago, because it's always a little, there's some degree of overlapping that takes place. For example, the ANR International Airport, ANR Robinson International Airport, it doesn't come under the THA budget. It comes
that's a central government issue.
It comes under the government budget.
Yes.
So are there other mega projects that are occurring in Tobago that are coming under the national government and not under the THA?
Well, the Scarborough Hospital was one that was a central government initiative. If they talk about any redevelopment of the port of Scarborough, that again would be a central government project, that kind of thing, right? But this is why I'm saying, Richard, my criticism is of the THA, because in other words, they ought to be able to show their own projects and say, well, hey, listen, this is something we want to build, we want to invest in for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It's going to have this benefit, it's going to produce this amount of income, that kind of thing, and present that and say, hey, listen, we need funding for this. That's why I'm
going to be sarcastic. If you can't send 27 people to dance in New York, how you go identify a major project?
But they do have a major project identified. Don't they have a huge plan for Roxborough that's supposed to cost $4 billion?
Yeah, but if you can't send the 27 Roxborough people to dance in New York without confusion, how you go identify the Roxborough plant?
And that Roxborough idea, Richard, is a THA plan. That's something that I think Mr. Duke on his own floated. I'm not sure
okay, it's not a THA thing.
Bought into it and adopted it officially as a THA plan at all. I've not seen any evidence of that.
Okay. Because, you know, we were having a discussion. Of course, we can't talk about Tobago and not talk tourism. And of course, he did talk about tourism at some point. He talked about tourism and he talked about certain projects on in Tobago in terms of hotel development.
I think he made mention of the Rockley Point Hotel that is supposed to be built and the Comfort Inn Suites, which was recently opened and stuff like that. But you see, I'll tell you all the problem with Tobago and its administrators and leaders in the past. They don't even know or understand what their tourism product is. So basically what you've had is fits and starts, Vicky plans being drawn up by this one, that one, the other one. Then of course they go on these expensive rides to these trade shows and these tourism shows where they seem to learn nothing except what the inside of a Walmart and a Kmart looks like, you know, and you have to shop at Macy's, you know. But I mean, in terms of any real benefit for Tobago, they don't seem to understand it. The fact of the matter is that you have to look at where you are in the Caribbean. You are at the southernmost point. So in other words, you have to be a very stubborn and determined tourist to even decide you're going to Tobago in the first place. Because you have Jamaica, you have Bahamas, you have so in between that you could stop by where it's easier to get access. You have much better hotel stock. You get much better service. I mean, you just name it. So therefore, you need to first of all understand where you are before you could even begin to attack the problem this way. Okay, let's start, you know, solving these issues. I have said that Tobago needs to start with simple things, okay? For instance, they're supposed to have like a service training and excellence program. And you reward people. So in other words, you have maybe an annual competition for the best waiter, the best waitresses, you know, that kind of thing. But you provide the training and the guidance and, you know, you make it exciting and interesting. You get the hotel school revitalized. I mean, the hotel school in Tobago at one point had to close down because nobody went. No Tobagonians were interested in going. You had more Trinidadians flying across Tobago to attend the hotel school than you had Tobagonians going to it.
And quite frankly, when they attended the hotel school, was to get trained to get a job on a cruise ship, not necessarily to work in Tobago.
Yes.
That's why they trained them, not necessarily to work in a hotel, you know.
Yes.
It was a stepping stone to get certification to end up on a cruise ship.
Outside. Yes, you're right. You're quite right.
So, I mean, don't talk about services. Just a side note, I went to a grocery, and this is not exclusive to Tobago, Trinidad, last week, and at the cashier, I had a bag with chives or sides, when you want to pronounce it, and the cashier looked at me. This is her exact delivery. Where is that? I said, excuse me, where's that? And she pointed at the bag. She gestured to the bag. I said, it's size. How much in there? I said, you may have to count it to find out. And the supervisor had to rush to say, that's not the way you treat a customer. So you could imagine in a service-oriented industry like a hotel. Where is that?
Yeah.
And she thought that was fine.
Yeah.
I mean, what?
We don't seem to understand that there's a value in providing quality service to customers or patrons. You know, I mean, the point is, part of the whole tourist experience is the quality of service you get. You know, everything may not be perfect, you know, but I'll tell you,
Martin.
A good attendant, a good waiter, a good
you're too far down the line. You're too far down the line. Part of a good tourist experience is first getting the promotion in your face and saying, I want to go there.
Yeah.
Then booking experience has to be optimal. So you're booking and you say it's easy to find amenities in terms of the hotel, find airlift, find things to do, and that experience has to be optimal because the other islands are doing it. They make it seamless and they press a button and you're inside and they take your money, right? And then the airlift experience has to be optimal. And then the landing experience has to be optimal.
Yeah.
And then the processing through customs and immigration has to be optimal.
Yeah.
And then the drive to the hotel has to be optimal. And then the welcome at the hotel needs to be optimal. It's not just about when you get to the hotel, you know, because if you have a bad experience in the airport, my vacation done.
Yeah.
I ain't coming back.
You're quite correct. And the thing is, we don't seem to understand that all these factors play a part and play a role in the overall panoply of what would be the tourism experience. And this is where we keep missing the point. So therefore, as I say, we operate by fits and starts. You know, this person comes with an idea to the THA and they say, okay, right, yes, we're doing this. And then this next one comes, or administration changes, they scrap those plans. You know, you're going and have a zip line. All right, okay, yes, you're hot and sweaty with that. Then you can't find the equipment that was supposed to be purchased. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. And you know, what's the amazing thing, Paul and Richard and Steve? Tobago has so much potential as a tourism destination. There are so many things that could be done. You know, I mean, I have suggested, you know, just a simple thing like, for instance, that area by the Esplanade, by the Scarborough Port, if that area were to be pedestrianized, you know, and you develop like little small bars, cafes, bistros, restaurants,
like a St. Lawrence Gap, like a St. Lawrence Gap.
Oh gosh, now you're talking.
Yeah, you know,
just a simple change like that. You know how much business that will bring in. When you have your cruise ships docking there, the tourists will stay right there because they have so many things to do. There's so much excitement and happening right there. Exactly as you say, like a St. Lawrence Gap, or like some areas in South Beach where they pedestrianize it, you know, and you have all the people basically dining in the street.
And they feel safe.
Well, that's the next thing.
That's the next thing. When the news about Trinidad and Tobago and crime goes out, the tourist the potential tourist is not disaggregating Tobago from Trinidad.
No, they're not.
So Trinidad and Tobago has a crime problem, and I don't feel safe in Trinidad and Tobago. And that needs to be dealt with in terms of the advertising and the marketing campaign. There are other aspects in the budget that do you think there are opportunities for Tobagonians or Tobago as a whole in terms of looking, because I don't get a sense that happens. They look at, for example, the renewable energy initiatives or the ICT initiatives or the technology hub initiatives that the assembly can look at and see how as an assembly they can facilitate Tobagonians as a group, as particularly young people, taking advantage of these and doing something in the THA to speak to the central government about facilitating a cohort from Tobago to maximize that, take advantage of that. Because it's not only specific topic issues for Tobago. The budget is for Trinidad and Tobago as a whole.
That's right. And this is why I'm saying a lot of the fault I still see lies with the THA, because the point is they don't maximize those opportunities. And you're quite right. For instance, technology is something that, you know, I mean, young Tobagonians will gravitate to once you provide that nurturing and enabling environment for them to be able to say, well, hey, listen, let me develop my skills. Let me think I could be. I mean, listen, I have a friend in Tobago. I mean, he does IT and networking, and I mean, this boy makes millions. You know, and this is just him on his own. So could you imagine if you are able to develop that as a proper training facility and ensure that the young people are able to understand the importance of developing these skills and then now being able to launch out into business on their own? You know, so the opportunities are there, but the point is...
but the THA has to act as a real facilitator and say, well, okay, I put out an ad and there's a provision in the budget. If you want to take advantage, come to the THA and register, and we get 30 young people, and they supply, the THA uses its offices to liaise with the central government or some other agency, and they supply airlift to come to classes, accommodation in Trinidad, some sort of stipend to ensure that the young people are able to go through a program, and some sort of... because very often a young person on his or her own, it's overwhelming.
Yes, of course.
If the teacher can act as a conduit for a group of young people to take advantage of the overall provision in the budget, it's a difference. It makes a difference, and it redounds to the benefit of Tobago as a whole and Trinidad.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, but you see, Paul, I think part of it is a lack of vision. And, the Bible tells us a people without a vision shall surely perish. And I think that is what has been part of the problem. In other words, people are too consumed with the small issues, the petty issues, the micro picture, instead of looking at the macroeconomic framework, because they're too busy with their personal infighting, or their egos, or their personal ambitions.
As somebody told me last week, if you're so consumed with throwing dirt, after a while you don't realize how much dirt fall in your own eye, you can't see. That's part of the problem. Do you think? Our question this morning was: do you think this budget, the provisions in this budget, will move this country forward? That's our overall question this morning. What are your thoughts?
In terms of moving us forward, I still say it seems to be a holding pattern budget. So, we will move forward, but as to whether we will make progress, I am not sure that I'm seeing the provisions for progress. So, in other words, yes, we will move forward by surviving for the next year. But in terms of progress, unfortunately, I'm not seeing it.
The allocation to Tobago, to me, depending on if you look at the percentage or the raw number, you could have a disagreement or a debate on whether or not Tobago got more or less in terms of percentage and or raw number. A lot of focus has been placed on this budget on education and training. What are your thoughts on that in the overall direction and development of the country?
No, that is definitely what is needed. But, Paul, it must be relatable to the man in the street, if you understand me. When I say that, it's no point just having, airy-fairy ideas, as you said, digitization. That has been bandied about. And, but the thing is, to the man in the street who still has to go in a government department, fill out a form, and then when you fill it out, they say, we're not accepting that because you fill it out in blue ink. We need it to be filled out in black ink, and that digitization doesn't mean anything to him,
No, I have one better than that. One better than that is the ministry provides a form online and says it'll be heading to the digital arena. So you get the form online, you have to fill it out and still take it in person. What? Yeah, yes.
So you have to then print it.
Yeah, you have to print it. So it's available online. So we're moving to the digital arena. But you have to download it, print it, fill it out, and then take it in. And what's the point? And we're not accepting digital signature to authenticate the form.
Right, yeah. So you need your original.
So what is the point? What is the point?
That says it all. But
or elderly people have to go and line up for the pension check and take it and carry it in the bank, as opposed to identifying the person by identifying and making sure that it's them through some mechanism, which happens all over the world, by the way.
Yes.
It's not novel. And that elderly person gets that check in the bank or in their account, as opposed to having to line up in front of this thing with the issues. And then as you said, those are the basic things that the society will say, yes, digitization is working for me, or it's not, or it's just a word.
Yeah. And that's the point. So, as I said, the focus on education is great, but the point is it needs to be relatable to the man in the street. But gentlemen, could I please ask if I could be excused, because I have another commitment which I have.
We appreciate your time and contribution. Thank you so much.
Thanks a whole lot. It's always a pleasure, and have a great morning.
Same to you.
All right. Thank you so much,
Business Chamber and Attorney at Law. Of course, we're going through our exploration of people's thoughts on the budget.
Recording stopped.
All right. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Martin. Taking a quick break. Be right back.
Every Sunday, enjoy brunch at the Cascadia Hotel for an introductory price of